Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is RCE assessment as learning and empowerment. So I would like to invite our moderator for the session, Dr. Zinaida, Fadeeva, and Professor Rob Otano.
Yes, from
I was thinking,
yeah.
how could she find?
Yeah. How did you find it?
Thank you.
This one, right? Oh, which one? Back forward? So shall I can start and say
Good morning, everybody. Whoever made it back from the parallel sessions. And this one is going to be short, concise, mainly informative, but we still look forward to some reflections from your side. The whole question on assessment and evaluation had a very long history in the RCE community. Many of you who were around for a while will recognize it. In fact, we started this discussion in 2007 when the first question, how well we do as an RCE community, was brought forward from within the RCEs. And at that time, we had two positions. One has been that we have to immediately start measuring the impact of our work. And first suggestion was measuring in a very literal, quote-unquote, way. by paying attention on how many tons of waste were minimized as a result of the RCE work, or how much poverty was eradicated in the areas where RCEs operate. Another position has been really to embark on learning, assessment as learning, and looking into activities which RCEs do value. So the discussion, which lasted for about 3 years, came up with consensus among the RCEs that assessment and evaluation processes which we are looking for have to be focused on, well, first of all, have to be self-assessment of the RCEs, but also be really predominantly starting from the point of what RCEs are valuing in their own activities. So initial few evaluations between 2010 and 2012 were piloted by a variety of groups within the RCEs and by a few RCEs themselves. And then it brings us exactly to the process which we are talking about now, when a group of the RCEs in Southern African countries have been piloting of the evaluation approach, which is currently we call the hybrid evaluation. And members of the RCE evaluation working group, which were working before this project, have consisted of the members of the RCEs from around the world, and they are listed here on the slides, including RCE KwaZulu-Natal, Jim and Teach were assisting and facilitating this thinking process, RCE Western Sydney with Jeff Scott contributing, RCE Graz in Europe, Clemens Mader has been with us there, and RCE European advisor Jos Hermans helped us enormously there. And I've been with other of my colleagues helping from the side of the unu-IAS. So it all came to the stage in 2012 when we tried to pull together all of these approaches and bring them to the RCEs in order to see to what extent they are realistic, helpful, doable, and to what kind of results they are getting. So also on the slide, you could see the list of the RCEs in SADC region in the Southern African countries, which piloted this RCE evaluation. RCE Lusaka, RCE Zomba, RCE Dar es Salaam, RCE Mutare, RCE Harare, RCE Swaziland, RCE Lesotho, RCE Komas Rongo in Namibia, RCE Makana, RCE KwaZulu-Natal were among the pilots. And from here on, I will turn the microphone to Rob, who has been very intimately part of this evaluation and who would also be sharing with us some of the lessons. And Rob, if I can ask you also to go through approach. But what we are trying to say that long histories since 2007 have been led to certain approach, which has been piloted by the RCEs and resulted in a very specific methodology. However, it is flexible methodology, and this is what this conversation is all about. So what do we have on the table and how to employ it, this approach, by the whole of the RCE community?
Thanks very much, Zinaida. I probably need to move around. And I probably need the little machine as well if I'm going to change some slides. Thanks very much. Evaluation has become an expert space. And I received an email last night about assessment and evaluation, and it would cost me about 1,200 euros to get a bronze certificate to become an evaluator. Then I could go for silver, gold, and becoming an expert evaluator. There is a tendency, and I've worked on many teams, where assessments are done by experts because you can't trust the people in the program. And if we take an example of an RCE starts with people sitting around and talking, right? And then they go on a journey. Zinaida used the idea, people going on a journey. And often they're sitting around and talking here, but they started here. And if you arrived here and you'd say, well, let's assess what's happened, we'd want to see, well, we need a baseline. So we take a baseline, our carpet here, and then we've got something that happened. We're going to end up here, and we want to know, has change happened? What change has happened? And we often talk about it as behavior change. And this has been the dominant approach in development to evaluation, where we're concerned with in the literature, they talk about it as end of pipe, the end of pipe. So I thought, well, maybe I could find a pipe, okay? And very kindly I stole, without permission, but by informing people, do you mind if I steal your pipe for illustrative purposes? So I stole this pipe. Can you hold the mic? I'll lift up the pipe. This is going to be a collaborative effort. No, I'll lift it. I'm strong, so just hold that. Okay, I wanted to lift it so that everyone could see it. Okay? If this was a pipe without the plants, Zinaida would be the expert evaluating it, and she'd be looking at what came out the end of the pipe. But what comes out the end of the pipe doesn't tell us anything about what's in the pipe here, and doesn't tell us anything about the fruitfulness of what's happening in the middle. Okay. Thank you. That's great. So you can keep looking at the pipe. So there's a problem with a very narrow culture that doesn't really fit well with our RCE work. So we have to expand the culture, and of course there's been a lot of work done on expanding the culture of evaluation, because our RCEs have a very good starting point. There's a very good culture of evaluation at the start when they put their proposal through to the Ubuntu team to be recognized. And there's some really good, deep evaluation at a local level that is done. But then we have a problem in our current culture in the RCEs that there's not a lot of evaluation happening in the middle, and now we're stuck here, and we're having to report, and we're having to justify, and we're needing to profile RCEs. And probably one of the best things we can do is get our assessments and evaluation right to build a culture of assessment and evaluation. So we did produce I'll move right down now. There are some publications here, and this PowerPoint will be available to people if you'd like a copy of it, that have documented the process. The first is through UNU Institute, and the second one is in a book that has just been produced on higher education research. So depending on what your interests are, you can find a suitable publication about this. For evaluation, we need to recognize what RCEs are about. And what I proposed is that people learning to change and produce freedoms together is quite a useful way of approaching RCEs. So what are the unfreedoms? It's a strange word, but it's often useful to invent new language because it helps us to think of things differently. what are the unfreedoms that we're dealing with in our work? And here is a very useful perspective on the way that we need to be rethinking, and the way that the RCEs are an amazing movement that is rethinking very important parts of the way the world works in order to set our institutions firmly on the path of future knowledges, because that's what we're trying to do, to escape unfreedoms with future knowledge, which gives us freedom. We need to reinvent a classroom without walls, and that's such a lovely thing. I think of every RCE that I've talked to as a classroom without walls, but it's not a conventional classroom. It's a different classroom without walls, in which we are all co-learners, a university that is capable of convening various publics in new forms of assemblies to become points of convergence of and platforms for the redistribution of different kinds of knowledges. And that came from Akili Mbembe. It's such a useful way of thinking about our work in RCEs, and a very good foundation for how do we evaluate it? How do we start evaluating, evaluate and do more work, and evaluate as we go along? So we need a sort of continuous culture of evaluation. And that's what we tried to do in the small pilot project that we did in Southern Africa. So we produced a toolkit, and we found that there are really great ideas about evaluation, but there's not one great idea. There are lots of great ideas. And you need to, for your situation, pick and adjust and use the great ideas that best fit your circumstances. Unfortunately, when we talk about end of pipe. What is the behavior change? We don't talk about what are the valued knowings that are changing, the valued doings, and the valued beings. How are people transforming? How are people changing? And the example that I used is we need to move from pipes in our thinking to people. Evaluation is not about pipes, it's about people. And people doing it, not bringing in experts, but actually being able to do it together. So what we did is we came up with this hybrid, and we started with the baseline being the constituting of the RCE. You don't have to do a baseline because you've already got one. You've got a document that is produced, that has been acknowledged by the Ubuntu Commission, that is the foundation of an RCE. So this is constitutive evaluation, where you go back and you look at, where you've come from and what does that mean, and have things changed? Because things can change very, very quickly. Many of the RCEs have moved quite way beyond their constitutive mandates that they set for themselves. They've evaluated and moved on, but they haven't often documented it as well as we could do. So we could strengthen that with this kind of assessment that we do. Then, in the literature in about the 1980s, when expert evaluation was severely marginalized as dictatorial and impositional, we started to get the emergence of appreciative inquiry, where people were asked what's working on the positive side. So that was the second step that we took, stakeholder accounts of the processes and projects on the positive side. And then out of developmental work, you start getting developmental evaluation, exploring ways to strengthen the engagement and goals. And then you start getting value creation, assessment of the value that's created in the RCE. And notice that this is an internal conversation. It's a conversation in the middle. And in many cases, when we were doing this evaluation work, we started with one evaluation group and we ended up with 4 or 5 people looking into, groups looking into evaluation of different parts, and then coming back together again and forming a strategy going forward. So this is what Zinaida has asked me to share with you. And what one can do then is you can look at what they call meta-evaluation when you start bringing all of these evaluation strands together, all of the assessments that have been done together. So out of this work, what we've produced is a toolkit. It comes, this is actually the whole toolkit, it's just on a PowerPoint, and it's got all of the notes in it as well. So this is opening up the question of how do we, what mix of approaches do we need to be able to do critical evaluation from within, but also results-based evaluation and impact evaluation. What we found, it was much easier when we had done this shared or self-assessment to do impact assessments. And once people had done evaluation work together, then they weren't so scared of evaluation. They weren't so worried and avoiding of evaluation. They were saying, we've done an evaluation, we've got an RCE, now we can do evaluation in our RCE, and now we can say something about what's coming out. What are the impacts? What are the value that is being created in it? So I hope this is a useful report back to you on the main areas that have come out of this small pilot project, and hopefully it'll open up a conversation so that we can talk about evaluation and assessment out of our different experiences in different RCEs.
Thank you, Rob. And just to pick up a couple of points and then re-emphasize them. We look at the assessment process as a shift between evaluation by expert, end of pipe evaluation, to evaluation by the whole RCE, by the whole totality of partners, and eventually moving from this evaluation by RCE, one-off time, so one time and moving forward to the culture of evaluation. So it is quite a fundamental transformation which we are looking at. Now, we did this piloting of this approach or similar one also in other regions. Well, Uni and I have been helping to facilitate four evaluation in India. Mario has been helping to evaluate this, to facilitate similar kind of approach in Thailand, right, Mario? And we did offer this approach to the discussion of the Japanese RCEs. So those which tried that came up with some observations. Those observations are that in addition to overcoming the fear of external evaluations and discovering the value of learning through evaluation, evaluations became an excellent realized way of recording own activities together. This is one. But also a way of collective planning. And the most important observation also has been that it's another way to re-engage partners. Quite often, and let's be frank about this, at the stage of the mobilization of the RCEs, a lot of conversations go between the facilitators, the coordinators, and potential partners on a bilateral basis. Many of these conversations also are virtual. So assessments become one of the few opportunities where all partners are engaged or re-engaged. And it also becomes a very nice briefing opportunity for the new partners to learn about RCE live before they joined in a systematic way. So remember, RCEs are communities where people come and go also. So with this our message to all of us is that we do have methodology which appears to be working for those which tried it, which is flexible, which helps to record, plan, and engage the partners. We also would like to emphasize that it's a very helpful tool to link it with a discussion this afternoon with reporting, because once we did this kind of evaluation, reporting became really a breezer. Okay? So with these few messages, maybe the next step would be to ask some of the colleagues which have been part of the evaluation, hybrid evaluation, to share their experiences from that. And I'm asking RCEs which did it, but also those colleagues from my team at UNU who have been engaged in this. Mario, Uni, can I ask your Abel? Okay, Mario is coming. The microphone is in front. Is Uni in the room? Okay, he's not.
I can use
Yeah,
this.
please. Thank you, Mario.
I had the privilege of observing the evaluation we had in 2 RCEs in Asia Pacific. One was in Thailand, RCE Chaam. We have RCE Chaam colleagues here present. That was in 2014, 2 years ago. And the other one in Cambodia, RCE Greater Phnom Penh. So very interesting. Now, out of that, my suggestion would be, because we have a very good document on assessment as presented, it is necessary to produce another document which is easily understandable on the ground, the ABCs of it, because they had difficulty following through the document that we provided to them. So we need to domesticate, if I use the word, domesticate it down so that it is in their language, which is easy to use. And the second one is that I noticed that the RCE membership, the stakeholders are dynamic as well. You know, those who were there at the beginning were no longer there when we had the assessment, except for the coordinating organization. The others are all new. And when we engage into the first phase of this evaluation, which is the constitutive, the core elements, we look into the core elements, which are 4, the governance, collaboration, transformative education, and research. Then they were blank on it. I mean, they had no knowledge about it because they're new. They were not there from the very beginning. And so we found out that there is a need to link assessment with building competencies, building capacities. So that need emerged. And when we went to the appreciative part, which is learning from the activities which they have, we noticed that many of the activities were very much not widely participated, but very much on their own, and they claim it to be an RCE. So it's because maybe the lack of knowledge about what ESD is all about and what ESD is all about. So these are the important lessons that we learned. And then when we went into the third phase, which is more strategic, going into the future, engaging into the future, the goals, that was very difficult. They preferred to develop a strategic plan instead, which is very clear to them. Out of the assessments from the first 2 phases, constitutive and appreciative, and then going into the future, what was clearer was a strategic plan, which is understandable to them, that would lead to a better RCE engagement into the future. So there is a lot of lessons that we learned. And these lessons, I think we need to look at those so that it could be reflected maybe in the methodology, and to domesticate the process into individual processes on the ground. 2 experiences very useful. And at our last Asia Pacific RCE meeting in June, hosted by RCE Cham in Thailand, there were some volunteer Asia Pacific RCEs that they said they would like to start their own self-assessment. And a number of them, about a dozen of them, I think, volunteered. So we would like to follow up with them in the next year to help them, to assist them in facilitating. But it is by them, but we only provide the support. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mario, thanks very much. That's such useful reflections, because we had the same experience in African RCEs where people were in the RCE, but there was no one there who had been there at the start. And we found that that was very, very important, not just to start with the members who are there, but to back assess, where did things start? How did the RCE come into being? What are the focus areas that we need to give attention to? And likewise, when people got onto developmental evaluation, they started to say, what developments are going to be possible for us to do? Let's put them into a strategic plan. And then the group agreed, well, what would be the most valuable things to do in a strategic plan? What is the value that we're trying to create? So the important thing is that this is not a method. Okay, this is a toolkit. And I think that, Mario, the support that you've given is, I'm a carpenter. I'm not really a professor, I'm more a carpenter. And I've got my tools at home. And when I need a saw, I'm wondering which kind of saw. And I've got a Japanese saw. It's the most wonderful saw that I've ever got, because it allows me to cut dovetail joints. And then I have got a Spanish saw that allows me to cut big planks. And what we need to look at when we're thinking about evaluation is, what are the tools that we need? And how can we choose the right tools for the job that we've got in hand? So I really appreciate that feedback, and I think it's important for all of us to reflect on the way that we should be learning from each other through exchanging experiences and documents on evaluation.
Thank you very much, Rob. And probably additional tiny point to make, that while indeed it is toolkit, and according to the circumstances, habits, and level of comfort, RCEs can employ one, two, or all of those elements of evaluation. They are presented as logically aligned, and in principle, each and every step there would add additional reflections, values, and strategic points. However, definitely it's not necessarily required to do all of those approaches or interventions or reflections in order to get to the useful results. Can I ask if Uni is back to the room? Yeah, may I just ask you to speak perhaps about Indian RCEs?
So, thank you. What we did, it was just before the Okayama International Conference. We wanted to know whether RCEs can do this kind of an assessment. And we checked with some of the Indian RCEs, and they were willing to do. And what we did was, we sent out a very preliminary questionnaire in terms of who are your partners, what are you currently doing, what is your future plan, and so on. So it was a very, very simple format. And then both Zinaida and myself, we visited some of the RCEs. So we did 4 such assessments: RCE Pune, RCE Goa, RCE Mumbai, all in the western side of RCE, India, and then RCE Delhi in the capital city. So what we realized was, it was very, very surprising that some of the old RCEs, though they continue to work extensively on education, learning, transformative tools, and so on, many of the programs were not reported to the service center as an RCE activity. But they work with same set of partners, they haven't reported. And some of the new RCEs, this was a very good learning platform because we invited all the RCE stakeholders to come together for a 2-day workshop in each of these locations. And they raised their concerns, they looked at what they have done, what they want to do, and so on. So we prepared a brief report, and the critical point that came out of that is that we need much more capacity in terms of looking at the activities to be reported, abstracted and reported to the global platform. So capacity building was very critical, both in terms of documentation and reporting. Another one is that often we felt that the RCE stakeholders, even though during the application, we have a set of stakeholders, higher education institutions, civil society organizations, businesses, informal education institutions, and so on. But when it comes to action, the main coordinating RCE or just the coordinator individually contacts with organizations and does projects. So these are either bilateral projects or small groups within the multi-stakeholder network that are acting. So which means that we also thought that it's critical to look at multi-stakeholder process and challenges in bringing together it as a multi-stakeholder program is also a critical component. So capacities, multi-stakeholder learning was also a challenge. Then most importantly, I think, if the RCEs had reported time series data, it was very easy for us to evaluate because we had the baseline data, and if we had time series data, this could have been all presented to the stakeholders, but most often that was missing. So that was the Indian experience, and we developed a short report on that. But subsequently, recent Asia Pacific JAM meeting, we have this beautiful format which Rob and colleagues have done, but we wanted to also simplify it because when we sent out this to Asia Pacific RCEs, many of them felt that it was quite a complex format, though it is not. It is not a complex format, but there was a feeling that reading through the different steps was difficult. So we wanted to, in the Asia Pacific meeting, we presented it in a very simple way. So what we asked the RCEs to reflect were on 3 points. What was the original application? Who were the stakeholders? And what was the original vision, collective vision of the RCE? What is its present status? And who are the current stakeholders? What are the multi-stakeholder activities that are happening? And what is the future direction? So past, present, and the future. So this was the simple format, and around 10 of them agreed. We had 2 to 3 conversations over Skype with the RCEs. Yesterday also in the Asia Pacific meeting, we continued this discussion. So I think the current feeling after the Indian experience is still valid, that we need a lot of capacities to reflect on this framework. Then I think there's also a need of capacity in terms of bringing together and sharing. Shared learning continues to be a challenge. So I think we need to look at the competencies. I would use the word capabilities or something, because we are not competing or it's not. The etymology of the word might not gel very well with the ethos of the RC network, but we'd look at it from that kind of a framework. But I think it's very important. Thank you.
I'd just like to highlight, thanks Uni, the importance of reporting. We had exactly the same problem, is that a person supported the group. It was Titch, Dick, and Jim Taylor, who supported the groups to do these evaluations. And some, like Namibia, Lesotho, and I think Swaziland, they did them independently. But none of them successfully translated their evaluation work into reporting. So we need to look very, very carefully at evaluation design so that it translates actually into reporting. Because that's very, very important. If we're going to take to heart the point from the unu-IAS is that we really need to be profiling our work as RCEs. And if we're going to be profiling it, we need to profile what we're doing and what's actually happening in those doings. And that's an evaluation process. A last point, Uni, is that some of the groups, when they were working with this, were very creative. When they were doing appreciative inquiry, what they did is they took a whole series of photographs and tape recorded people and what they said, describing what they were doing and what was happening and the value that was being created. And they produced these little video clips of pictures and what people said. And that was very interesting because then they got a discussion going from the RCE partners into the broader partnerships of people working together and into a broadening in the community. So if you've got starting points, it's very important to innovate. The other thing that I would be critical of in terms of this design, it has the appearances of being a linear process. So we probably need to redraw that as circles. So you can actually start anywhere and you can move in different directions according to the focus and need that you've got. And then the final point would be the intellectual literature, although it's difficult to get into, it's very good in an RCE if you've got a young student who's working at a university to start taking up evaluation research and actually building a career by doing evaluation research. So keeping it simple and making it very practical can go with good intellectual work that will be recognized in the profiling of work and also for university qualifications if you want to get someone doing evaluation research with you.
I guess what we are really saying now is that the text or the materials which we have and experiences which we recorded can be used in a very flexible way, and so the whole evaluation exercise by RCEs can be as short or as long or as concentrated in time or as long spread as you want. We would be very happy to engage with those of you which are planning to undergo evaluation, to support you in this process in various ways. And the next 15 minutes of this conversation would be exactly dedicated to this. So if you are thinking about evaluation, and please think about it not, again, as end of pipe, what I achieved already, full stop, but think about evaluation as the way to engage and collectively think and plan with your colleagues, multiple colleagues. So if you think about doing it, we are happy to walk along with you by brainstorming the methods of organizing the meetings, by finding easy ways of recording partners' experiences, like in the case which Rob now mentioned, for example, through partners of the RCEs taking quick pictures of the activities, projects they do and bringing them to the evaluation assessment meeting to strike a conversation, to make a discussion, by finding theoretical or practical or conceptual or modeling methods for recording, presenting for you. Most importantly, we are happy to put you in touch with other RCEs which would like to do a similar process, so we will have a bit of a conversation, because what we are saying again, it's not, we are hoping that from one-off exercise at the end of which no one is really seeing what was planned or what was discussed, it is being part of the conversation between the partners, conversation which is ongoing. Now, we started this process, as Rob already said. We had a series of first Skype conversations. We left it to you to call upon us. Well, when would be the next stage? We know that probably it happened now in January, from January forward. But if you are really interested in it, first of all, let us know. And second of all, we have 15 minutes now to explore various suggestions about what kind of support you need from us, from others, from inside, from outside of your RCE community. So how can we start moving collectively and support this process in case you find it important or interesting? Yeah. The microphones are in front of the room. So if you are to share your wishes, please, Gail.
It won't be vicious. Thank you for this. One thing that might help us is to see examples of best practices for what you would expect in terms of documentation, case studies. You've done a pilot, so I imagine you have some assets, and you could bring forward at scale, small community, big community, what kinds of work best reflects the evaluation that you hope to get. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, the references that I showed you earlier on are actually a published so all of the case evidence is in this report and in this report. The other thing is that it's moving. So if you've got an example and you work on something, we already have happening at an international level all the indicators in the SDGs. We also have many instruments being developed for assessment at the macro level, intergovernmental exchanges of data. So you can find all sorts of other sources. I'll just quickly rush through this if it can go fast enough for me, while someone else comes up to share their ideas. This is going to be painful. The computer's too slow. I'll find another slide. Would anyone else like to come up with a question in the meantime? Just take it off.
Thank you. Jess Fernandez from RCE Bogor. I'm just concerned with what you said, Zinaida, that the RCEs will be much more flexible to choose any of the methods that are given in the toolkit. I just wonder how the Secretariat would process the reports from the RCEs depending on the tools or the evaluation mechanism that they would use. And so you can be able to leverage the status of the processes of the different RCEs. Because if it will be subjected to the likings of the RCE just because it's so easy to do or difficult to do, then we just can't have a very general assessment of what and how RCEs are performing globally. Thank you.
Well, this is a quite tough question, and I also will ask Rob probably to reflect on this. Well, predominantly the assessments are really conceived as self-assessment. The support toolkit to get the RCE moving forward, so it is really an engine. It's oil for the engine, however you see it. So that's its primary goal, right? We also say that what Rob mentioned, that in principle, yes, you can do only some of the elements of that, and we think it still would give you sufficient data for profiling the RCEs. Ideally, and I think this is what Rob you were saying, that you will probably enter into the RCE evaluation from step 2 or 3 and then go into other steps. So it's not that you necessarily will neglect it, but you will come from the comfortable door or window or chimney, right? Also, please remember the assessment exercise is not standalone tool sort of for us collectively as RC community and also as unu-IAS to work with. We also have reports, we have various case studies which you are submitting, we have articles on which we are working, etc. So unu-IAS by its nature is a think tank, and we are drawing on variety of sources, so that's also somewhat create a much more balanced picture. So the answer is, well, first, it is for RCEs, second, variety of sources, and third, well, it is really a process in making which we would need to strengthen by variety of means, but it is really not about judgment or not even about benchmarking, which doesn't mean that I'm saying that we are not critically looking at our work. Do you want to add something, Rob?
Yeah, I think that sounded like a question that would be very important for a global development agency to be asking the RCEs. And I think it's a challenge, therefore, that we still haven't met. It's a challenge that the RCEs need to tell their stories, report their activities, and profile what they're achieving. And we haven't done that. We've neglected the middle. We've actually neglected that because we've been so busy trying to work out what we need to do. While the next person is coming up, let me just show you some new tools that we're adding. This is a tool that's come out through work with indigenous communities. Like in evaluation, what do we need to take into account much more than we have done? We need to take healing, decolonizing, the mobilization of indigenous knowledge practices or heritage knowledge practices, the transformation of civic action in situations of oppression. And Smith was saying that as early as 1999. So people who are going to be working with evaluation, you need to take tools like these and work with them in a generative way, taking into account these in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. If we're going to be doing evaluation now that we've got the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to look at the RCEs as a nexus, and we need to look at ESD, and how do we group the various focus areas that we're looking at for evaluation purposes, and how do we draw on the Sustainable Development Goals as evaluation focus areas. So this is one attempt as a tool to begin to work with the SDGs. You don't need to see it. You can get the PowerPoint. But there are a number of these coming out. This was a useful one that I came across out of work in Europe. Then you can map and model the SDGs using modeling systems like this. They can be very useful for assessments. Here's an initial assessment. Here is the critical focus area assessment in relation to the SDGs. So this is another tool that can be used in RCEs. And here's a very interesting one that comes from John Holmberg on future sustainability, which I'm using a lot now, looking at principles for future sustainability like dignity and basic needs, natural system degradings, the concentrations of substances and the concentrations of man-made substances, and how can we backcast? Some of you might be familiar with this. So the idea, I think, that's really important is to have RCEs sharing and exchanging tools, practices, and reporting out of evaluation work. And I think that's at the heart of this. Not trying to sell a particular way of doing evaluation, but looking at starting points and concentrating on, we do need an evaluation culture, and we do need to be not only looking at the end of pipe, but actually looking at everything that's happening in the middle as well.
Thank you very much, Rob. And Fernandez, just to come back to your point. So what Rob is saying is also refers to next steps in potential development of the stages of evaluation and what RCEs, if they choose to do that, can do. But it also tells that this kind of mapping and positioning of individual RCEs or RCE community as a whole also could be done with unu-IAS to really get appreciation to contribution of RCEs to various SDGs or to other elements of development agenda. Yeah. So the microphones are in front, so if you have a question, wish, or clarification,
just
please.
Just a follow-up question. Well, we all know that self-assessment would always be very subjective, and we always have to put our best foot forward every time you make reporting. I just wonder how the Secretariat would really use the information that will be reported by the different RCEs, so we will know whether how we would not be too much subjective on reporting the best things that are happening with us, but also the gaps in the processes that we are encountering every now and then. Because if the Secretariat would be like using the information to provide technical guidance to improve operations, then that would be nice. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, because it reflects the idea that we haven't yet learned to trust self-assessment. In the intellectual literature, people did that, and they say, you know, self-assessment, people are going to promote themselves. Look what happens. You've got Facebook. That's a promotional framework. You've got selfies. And people are much more promoting themselves through self-assessment. But if you actually examine, say, Roy Bhaskar's work on critical realism, it's only through interactive processes where you get a process called intersubjective objectivity. So that when people work on self-assessments and they work in a team, then they check each other and they question each other. So you do get to objectivity through the subjective as the starting point. And if you look at natural sciences, in his assessment of the natural sciences, that's what he pointed out. That the scientists smuggle in ontology. They take in life experience and then they do empirical studies. So we must trust self-assessment as a starting point. Self-assessment that is going to produce the kind of reliable, trustworthy, and objective outcomes that are going to strengthen the work that we're doing.
Well, it is probably one of the most critical points which emerged in the evaluation, discussion, and practices of the RC community. Also, Fernandez, we are looking into the reports. There are not too many of reports of self-assessment which have been produced so far. But we are looking exactly for this purpose, to see what kind of support could be realistically provided. So the whole idea of capacity building and unu-IAS support for or understanding the ways of capacity building comes exactly from the self-assessment exercises previously. More than that, within the self-assessment toolkit, one section is specifically dedicated, for example, to the relations with unu-IAS and with the rest of the community, and that is specifically calling on the subject of calling for particular technical expertise, intervention, or help.
Now, one final comment from me is that when we were doing this work, I bet you can guess what people said. They said, Rob, how do you want us to do this assessment for you? That was the first approach that we got from every RCE. How do you want us to do this assessment for you? And it's really important to start on the right foundation. If we're going to be doing assessments and evaluations in the RCE, they need to be for us. They actually need to be for us in the RCE, not for someone else outside. If we're doing evaluation and assessments for the UNU, we're wasting our time. Okay, because what we end up doing is we end up greenwashing and whitewashing. We actually have to be doing them so that we can trust them, we can trust ourselves, and we can trust our data to inform a strengthening of our own work. And perhaps that's the main learning that has come out for us in the pilot. So thanks for this opportunity of sharing and for the inputs that you've provided there. They are very valuable. Many of them resonated with what we'd learned, and new ideas are coming out.
I think we have a question there, right?
I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, we have two questions quickly. Kyoko, we are sorry, just 2 minutes. Quick intervention, quick question. We are asked to finish in 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, my question is about the link of this assessment and the UNU assessment that we have online in terms of reporting. Because strengthening systems is good. The next one is unpacking the different steps of this assessment. It is important for the RCEs to understand. Maybe we need a more detailed session where each step is unpacked for us so that we are able to share that with the stakeholders. And my final one, self-assessment is knowing yourself, what you can do and what you cannot do, and then getting opportunities of strengthening that. What are some of the ways we can actually bring stakeholders together to understand that this tool is important? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm from RCE Lesotho. I see that we are also in the pilot. I just want to endorse that Lesotho would really want to participate in this kind of initiative, especially now that we are working towards reviewing our initial strategy on ESD. We actually have some little UNESCO funding to implement some of the priorities of GAP, especially priority 2. We'll be working with the College of Education. We'll be working with the secondary school to implement the whole school approach to ESD. We'll also be working on priority 5, building local, whatever it says. But I think this kind of activity will help us identify our strengths and weaknesses, especially because most of the work has really been done by a coordinator, Dr. Mukugu. So we need to put our act together as an RC and involve more people. So we need this kind of initiative. Thank you.
Maybe just an answer. Funding for these kinds of things is often what we look for before we can start. This entire initiative was done by zero funding into the development of the materials and into the production. We absorbed that ourselves. And then each group only got funding to get people together and have a meal together to work for a day. And it's very interesting that what we've got to try to do is to take up these initiatives and to do them in the simplest, most practical and reasonable way that we can. So I would encourage people to not overfund evaluation activities, to just provide the necessary support that groups might need to do it for themselves, because then the empowerment comes from within and the knowledge is held within. So thank you very much for both of those examples, which is a challenge going forward.
Yeah, and just to, again, second the sentiment about not over-funding, for evaluation to become an engine for continuous conversation among multiple actors, one-off funding doesn't really help, so it has to be found the way for practical, ongoing process for that. Now, Mari, the question about connection between reporting and self-evaluation would be explored more in the session next. But you yourself already answered this question very beautifully, saying that if self-evaluation is about knowing yourself and you know what's happening in your community of the RCE, so feeling a few questions which are easier now on the portal on the annual basis once a year is really becoming a piece of cake. So, however, it is a logical link for us and quite helpful liaison between two instruments, but it doesn't have to be this way. And in terms of explanation of the steps and discussion of the better ways of doing it, as I mentioned, we are happy to be part of this process. We are happy to, in fact, put together a little online, maybe a series of webinars in a manner of training. But for that, we need your explicit expression of interest and indication of time when you would like to go for that. So if we can put together a group of RCE, say in Africa or in whichever combination of regions, we are happy to do it. So I hope that was informative enough and whetted your appetite. We look forward to your indication of interest and your suggestion about the needs which need to be addressed in order for us to carry on this process without being overwhelmed and to the benefit of the RCs themselves, and this is also our goal, of course. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to Rob for sharing very rich experiences, and this question drew to the closure. Thank you very much. And now one practical announcement. We have a discussion during the lunch on the subject of education or education for sustainable development and migration. And Jos Hermans, can you stand up and show yourself, please? Will lead a group interested in this area. So I know that European RCs are interested as well as RCs from Mexico borderland. And whoever else is keen on this discussion, Jos will be with you and leading this conversation during the lunch time. Please join him immediately after I put down the microphone, and we will see you after the lunch in the parallel groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zinaida, Fadeeva, and Professor Rob O'Donnell. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for lunch. We are going to have about 50 minutes for lunch, and after lunch we are going to have our parallel session. So the parallel session would be divided by theme. Initially there are 6 rooms, but now we have 5 rooms since migration class would be held here by Mr. Jos Herman. So the room C would be for health, room E would be for youth, room A would be for higher education driven initiatives, room F would be TVET, room B about policy support, and that was the last class. So ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your lunch and see you later.